We ran up the word count, we ran up the stories. We ran up the word count, we ran up the stories. We ran up the word count, we ran up the stories. Hey. This has been a week of failure. I feel like a failure this week. Here I am, and it's Saturday afternoon, and I don't have a story to tell. My main focus, day to day, week to week, is writing stories, and here I am, and it's Saturday, and although I've been knocking my feet against the pavement every day and my hands against the tablet, the keyboard, here it is, it's Saturday, and there's no story to tell. There's no story to tell, but at least we can say we ran up the word count, we ran up the stories. We ran up the word count, we ran up the stories, we ran up the word count. Hey. I've been living in my vehicle for about 6 or 7 months now, 8 months maybe. Losing track of time, and one thing that I've been struggling with is feeling like a failure, feeling like I'm running through mud or writing stories through mud. Feel like I'm being judged. Feel like I'm judging myself because I didn't have this in mind when I was a child. When I was a child, I didn't think that I didn't look towards the future and think, oh, there will be a time one day. The direction that I'm oriented is to live in a vehicle, and the vehicle is an 8 by 10 box. And sometimes I feel like I'm trapped. But at least I can say that I ran up the stories. I ran up the word count, I ran up the stories. And that's all you can do sometimes is run up the word count, run up the stories. And I've realized recently that there's somebody out there who they want what I have. There's somebody out there who wants my van. They want to live in my van. They want what I have, and I go for a run every day, and I run in the Florida heat. And when I run in the Florida heat, one thing I think about constantly is sacrifice and competition, and that person who wants my vehicle. There's a person out there who wants my vehicle, and it sounds strange, but I don't think of it in terms of another person, but rather myself in another dimension. There's a version of myself who is willing to sacrifice more than what I'm willing to sacrifice. They're willing to go more all in than what I'm willing to do. When I get tired in the midst of my run and you start doing the thing where you're just pitter pattering, just chopping your feet, trying to keep a running motion going, and sweat is gushing from your pores, and there's random pains in your legs or in your heart, even. And worst of all, you feel like maybe there's not even a reason to keep going. You feel like you've gone far enough, you're content. You feel like if you go further and if you keep running and if you don't give up, it won't do anything positive for anyone. And when I'm in the midst of that sort of mindset, what I think about is there's a version of myself in another dimension who, just because I've sacrificed and sold everything that I had and went into a van, there's somebody else who wants it more than me. There's another version of myself that sacrificed even more, and he's freezing on a park bench. He's living on a park bench somewhere. But oddly enough, he wakes up and he writes stories, and he writes the stories that I want to write. And now here I am at the end of the week, and I don't have a story to show for it. I don't have no story came to fruition. No story came to fruition, but I'm able to say that I ran up that word count and I ran up the stories. I ran up a bunch of bad stories that never really amounted to anything. And that other version of myself, he's more, there's many of those versions, but there's one who's way more sacrificial, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to tell the story that is within my heart that I want nothing more than to tell. And it's not just one story, it's not even a lifestyle. It's not a hobby, it's not a joke. It is a way of being. It is the true version of myself. And that story that I want to tell, it's not just one story, it's the conglomeration of stories. I'm willing to speak the truth and to be vulnerable, but he's willing to cut open his heart and bleed it out onto the page, and he has nothing to lose. And I'm still operating like I have nothing to lose, and I need to be more truthful, more forthright, and more honest. And the reason why I went down this journey to begin with of telling stories, selling all of my possessions to live in a vehicle to tell stories, is because I want to deal in information. There's information that is lacking within our collective ethos. And the world is very tempting. The world tempts you into bad directions, and I've been tempted into all of the worst directions. I've been tempted into to do all of the things that I knew was wrong, but I've done them anyway. And when I've made the wrong decision, it caused me immense pain. Drinking too much alcohol, smoking too much cannabis, degrading sacred acts. I've done those things, and that I ended up in snares of the adversary. And what has consistently gotten me out of the snares of the adversary was piece of information. And the information that I received illuminated my mind, whereas at the time it was like I was in a maze, but I'd fallen into a pitfall, and the world closed in around me, and I was in a tight box, and information got me out of the box, or I was deceived and I was wrapped up by a python and I couldn't move. And in both scenarios I couldn't move, but the penicillin, the antidote, it's always been information. And it's really interesting, the state of the world that we're in right now. We have access to way more information, and people offer their information. And truthfully, my perspective of the information that is offered in the world is that most of it is trash. So much of it is trash. And the information the reason it's trash is because people are doing it for business reasons, money. They're trying to write books, do podcasts because they want to make money. They want to get attention. And sometimes I fall in that same trap as well, and I feel like maybe I'm a small baby and I'm yearning for attention in the same way that a baby, when they're born, they need to be hugged, and if they're not hugged and if they're not touched and loved, they will get sick. They need attention. We need attention. So sometimes I fall into that same pitfall, that same trap. But the solution that I've always found is information that has come from people, and the way that it's come from people has been like a miraculous anomaly. One of the books that have benefited my life is Confessions by Leo Tolstoy. And Leo Tolstoy had become the most popular writer of his time, the most famous writer. He was incredibly wealthy. He had a massive family. But then he wrote a book called Confessions, and he was basically like, "Hey, world, I know that I know that I have all of these things, but I just want you guys to know that I'm struggling right now. I'm struggling right now, and I don't have a reason to live. And my life is like being trapped halfway down a well, and I'm hanging on a branch, and that branch that I'm hanging on that is keeping me from what is at the bottom, and at the bottom are the open jaws of a beast. The thing that's keeping me from falling into the open jaws of the beast is this branch, but this branch is being chewed away by two mice, and one of them are black and one of them are white, and I can't climb up to the top of the well because there's another beast, there's a predator up there with its jaws wide open as well. So I just want you guys to know that I don't know why I'm alive, and I feel miserable every day. And my brother had been a Christian when we were younger, and I used to make fun of him, and now I'm realizing that I went wrong somewhere. There was somewhere along the way that I went wrong, and I'm trying to rectify it. So you guys can read this or you can not read this, but I just want you to know that I'm struggling, and maybe if you're struggling too, you can read this and realize that you're not alone. And I read Confessions, and I was in a bad state of mind, a bad state of being at the time, and it made me realize that my problem at the time, despite the fact that I was broke and lacking admiration of others, certainly, but even respect of myself, that wasn't the reason for my pain. The reason for my pain was that I was spiritually deficient. I was spiritually deprived. So it doesn't make sense that he would have written that book, because it wasn't even meant to do anything commercially for him. But that's my favorite book that he read, that I've read by him, because it was anomalous. It didn't make sense as to why he would do it. It was just blatant honesty. And the anomaly of it was a miracle in my life, because it helped me move. So that's one example, and there's been plenty of books that have benefited me in that way, and podcasts as well, and people speaking honestly. I mean, truthfully, it's the same thing about the Joe Rogan podcast, because I was watching the Joe Rogan podcast when he first started off, and I saw it, and I was like, oh, I wasn't okay at the time, and I was like, this guy is okay, and I don't actually even comprehend why he's okay, but I resonate with it. But at the time, he was just in his house in a living room, and he was talking to his comedian friends, and they were laughing, and they were just having conversations for the sake of having conversations. So it's incredibly difficult to have proper intentions, to not have selfish intentions, but that's where all beauty flows. All beauty flows from letting go of selfish desires and doing things for the right reasons. And it hasn't even been close. There's been no place where I found more value than what I would call communication, information, linguistics, verbal language, whether it has come from books, whether it's come from podcasts, whether it's come from speeches, it doesn't matter. Information has been where I've found the most value. And it's like that quote in the Bible that men don't live by bread alone, but from every word that flows from the mouth of God. And these people who I've resonated with, it's not like I'm saying that everything that they've said has been a truth that has that has flowed out of the mouth of God, but it's like some of the things that they've said have been exactly that. So I want to do that for other people as well. I want to do that for other people as well. And I don't have information. I don't have secrets. I don't have clues. I am on a journey of discipleship, and the Greek word for disciple means student, learner, someone who learns. And that is my values, that I'm on a path of learning. And as I learn, I'd like to give the things and the value that I learn to other people. And to go full circle with that, I've just felt like a failure this week because I couldn't bring anything positive to fruition. I couldn't bring a story to fruition. And there was, it was undeniable. I went so hard. I was doing everything possible. I was spending hours and hours and hours writing. When writing became too much, I'm walking around outside and I'm speaking words into my phone via a small microphone. That way I can continue to do something like writing to find something, find some sort of gold. And no story came to fruition, and stories are what's most valuable. Stories are where people can find information that they can tangibly take into their life and better themselves and work towards becoming the best version of themselves. And I didn't find it this week, but at least I can say that I ran up the word count and I ran up the stories. They weren't good stories, but I ran up the word count, I ran up the stories. And there's a piece of information that I came across this week that I circled back to, that I found a long time ago, and it is in the New Testament of the Bible. Paul says that the only way to not have the only way to fulfill the law is to have no law to break. So the only way that a person can fulfill the law, can uphold the law, cannot break the law, is if they have no law to break. And I've been trying to implement that into my life, and it's been of tremendous value to me, especially this week, because the law, you can think he's referring to the 10 Commandments, and you can think about what the 10 Commandments do and what the law overall does. The law keeps you from hell. The law is the thing that's like, all right, don't break this. Just, you can do whatever you want, but don't break this, and you will at least not go to hell. And I've been spending the last few months, last long period of time in my life trying to uphold the law. And what else is the law if it's the thing that keeps you from hell? Well, it is the striving towards the best version of yourself. Because if you're striving towards the best version of yourself and you're focused on that, if you bring it to fruition, then ideally you won't go to hell. You won't descend into a worse version of yourself. You won't be unnecessarily miserable. So that's what I've been doing for a long time, and this week I became miserable because what I realized is that I am not the best version of myself. So the really interesting thing about his quote of the only way to uphold the law is to have no law to break is that if you're aiming for the best version of yourself, but you don't bring that to fruition, meaning you fall into hamartia, you fall into sin, you make a mistake, then you end up falling short of the law. You end up falling short of the best version of yourself. And when you fall short of the best version of yourself, you feel bad. You feel less than. You feel inadequate. And because you feel inadequate, you start to invariably become resentful at the law itself. You become resentful at the best version of yourself because the best version of yourself is like the judge and you're reaching for it, but you can't quite obtain it. You can't quite obtain this standard of being the best version of yourself. So what do? Well, you can start again, or in the resentment that you have built up towards the standard and towards the best version of yourself, you can stop believing in it. You can become angry at the fact that it exists, and you can just let go of it and say, well, that doesn't even exist. The law doesn't exist. The best version of myself doesn't exist. But at that point, you're not really oriented towards anything. So you're floating around in time and space. And if the wind blows, the wind is going to blow you into whatever direction. And you're certainly going to fall back into mistakes and temptations. So the only way to get out of that cycle of falling short of the law and then feeling miserable and resentful is to have no law to break, because then you'll no longer feel needlessly and excessively miserable. So you let go of the law, and what do you have to fall back on? Because the law, if nothing else, was that grounding. It was that thing that you could stand on and walk on. But now you're not grounded. You're floating around in time and space. And that commitment that you had, that old covenant, has dissipated. You let it go. You need something else to ground you. You need a new covenant. And whereas the first covenant was meant to keep you out of hell, keep you out of degenerating into a lesser version of yourself, so you were trying to avoid going backwards. It's like the quote in Alice in Wonderland where they say, if you want to stay in the same place, meaning if you don't want to fall backwards, if you don't want to fall, you've got to run as fast as you can to uphold the law. You've got to run as fast as you can to just stay where you're at. But if you want to get anywhere, you've got to run twice as fast as that. So it doesn't really make sense because you can't run twice as fast as you can run. So how are you going to get anywhere? And the alternative to the first covenant, which was to avoid hell, is a new covenant, which is to go to heaven. So how do you get to heaven? In that section of the New Testament, Paul describes Abraham, and that first covenant that I'm describing is the covenant that God had made with Abraham. And St. Paul says, the reason why Abraham had the covenant to begin with is because he had favor with God. God didn't just pick a random person and say, all right, I'm going to make a covenant with you. Abraham had favor with God, and that's why he received the covenant. So in that same way, you can have favor with God. And how did Abraham have favor with God? He had favor with God through faith. He had faith. So rather than maintaining this covenant of trying to just avoid not being the worst version of yourself and vaguely aiming for a better version of yourself that you would hope to be the best version of yourself, you could strive to go to heaven. You could strive to end up in heaven. But there's still nothing to ground you in that situation. You have to have something to ground you. And that which can ground you, rather than a vague belief that you could avoid hell by being a better version of yourself, is a promise from God that He will bring you to heaven if you have faith. You have to truly have faith. So I'm in this place right now where I'm trying to write stories, and I'm trying to provide value for other people. And one of the things that I've always thought about as I'm writing and as I'm writing stories is I imagine my future children reading my stories, and I imagine the love that I would have for my future children, people that are children, innocent, start off as innocent, they grow older, they need guidance. Hopefully I'm alive and I could give them that guidance, but if I'm not alive, I've still got information, and I'm trying to give that information away right now, and I'm trying to continue to garner information. And that is my intentions when I write, is to just be objectively honest, be truthful about what's going on. And then maybe people will see that and resonate with that and feel it, and it'll be of value to their life, and it'll illuminate their mind and their consciousness in the same way that other people have done it for me. In the same way that Vincent van Gogh did it for me, despite the fact that nobody saw any of his paintings while he was alive, he just kept painting. Keep painting, keep painting, keep painting. We were meant to live for so much more, and we lost it all. Dun 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 dun. Sometimes I wish I were a singer or a really good musician, and that I could just turn on a microphone and bleed out my heart that way by singing or rapping. We ran up the word count, we ran up the stories. We ran up the word count, we ran up the stories. Yes. Yes. Anyway, I think we're going into a bad direction. I think this world is going into a bad direction. I think people are becoming very nonchalant and apathetic, and I think AI can be a good tool that people could use. I think people could I think everybody could be raised up, and we could enter into something that is like a new renaissance, or we could find ourselves being chastised by God because we forgot that God would chastise us. We thought that we could do whatever we want. We thought we could live the way that we want. And in a way, we can live however we want. But one of the things that are so interesting to me about stories is that one of the requisites for a story is a problem. If somebody's writing a story and they're talking about characters, but the characters are just existing and there's no problems and there's not meaningful action happening, the reader and the viewer are like, what's going on with this? This isn't really a story. This is just you're just telling me things. You're telling me irrelevant things. So a good story always has a problem. And it's really interesting if you think about what that means, because stories are indicative, representative of life. And a good story has a problem. A good life has problems, and it contends with the problems. So sometimes in my mind and explicitly, I bash society as it stands right now. I bash technology, and I bash crypto dorks who get on there and they fell into money and they do a podcast, but they have no edge about them, and they wear glasses while they do a podcast because they're insecure. And that's fine, but they're not willing to bleed out their heart. They fell into money and they fell into success. And I look at people who are eating a bunch of junk food and they are poisoning their temple constantly, and they don't move, and they are wasting the gift of life, and I become frustrated, annoyed. But obviously maybe it is actually myself who I'm annoyed at, because why would I care? The only reason I would care is to the extent that it affects me, and it does kind of affect me because the world has fallen, and I believe that it is continuing to fall. But anyway, my point with that is stories have problems. Jesus Christ came and told the world to deny yourself and carry your cross, to love thy neighbor and thy enemy as though they are yourself. And there is a very clear pathway, but these extra things aren't even necessarily superfluous. Technology in whatever form, crypto, streaming, the easy access of information, medical progress, that those things aren't actually bad. They're not inherently bad, but the issue is that they take away from what's important and what is good about life, which is a paradox that what is good about life is actually the struggle itself, the willingly denying yourself and carrying your cross. So my my goal is to obviously impact the world in a positive way, but I think that the realm that I can do that is in information and via mining for information, discovering valuable nuggets, putting them into stories, telling them to people via stories, and continuously making sacrifices. And despite the fact that I feel like a failure all the time, and that I'm in a van, and this van is like a 10 by 6 prison, it is a good thing because it forces me to. It is black and white. Either I'm going to live well today or I'm going to be in a state of misery. And the only way that I can feel good about myself is that if I close that gap, if I actually go to heaven, if I actually realize the brevity of life and how short time is and the fleeting resource that is time and attention, and I put my time into attention into training, properly nourishing my body, writing stories like my life depends on it, because if I don't write the stories, somebody else is going to do it, and it might not even be in this dimension. It's a version of me in a different dimension. And I didn't write a story this week, but at least I can say I ran up the word count and I ran up the stories. I ran up the word count, I ran up the stories. Hey. So that's where we're at right now. We're getting better every day. I am doing whatever I can to move the needle. I've let go of the law. I am doing whatever I can to continue to build up faith, go deeper into humility, and through doing that, I have faith that I will go to heaven. And not only do I have faith that I will go to heaven, more either as importantly or maybe even more importantly, maybe what I care about even more. People could judge me for this, but I actually think it's true. And when I look at my heart, I think this is the proper intention. But I want the people that I love to go to heaven with me, and I'm going to lay my life down to make that happen. And there's only one place where I can make that happen. It is in the day. And there's one thing that I know. There is a day ahead.